Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to today's virtual showcase. Thank you for taking the time to join myself and our sponsor Spanning on today's discussion, which for the next 90 minutes is all focused on it's not a matter of if, but when, the risk of attack in today's cyber threat landscape. My name is Nick Pryke. I will be your host for the next 90 minutes and very much looking to fill that purpose. My role here is to get us going, keep the conversation balanced, and give you all the open space to get exploring, share insights, and connect those all-important experiences. To that extent, a couple of quick bits of housekeeping before we get started. This is a closed-door session. Nothing we discuss here will be released into the public domain, so please do feel free to get comfortable and share your experiences. Today's showcase will also include a keynote and a panel discussion, both of which will have an open audience Q&A session. So please do get involved. We actively encourage it to do so. We have Adam, our technical operator, who sat with me in the studio here, on hand to field questions and get you ready to come up on stage to ask away. Simply drop your question in the Q&A component down at the bottom of your navigation bar, and we'll bring you up when the time is right. This showcase indeed is all about getting the most out of the next 90 minutes and beyond. So to make sure that that does continue past today, our team here at Synergy will be following up with you all after the showcase to get feedback on your experience, any connections you'd like to make, and we'll also be providing you with the recording from today and any further information from the discussion that you would like. So enough from me and housekeeping, and more about what we're here to do and talk about today. In the last 12 months alone, 50% of organizations have faced some form of ransomware attack, with SaaS data taking pole position in the crosshairs of threat actors across the globe at a whopping 51%. An increasingly common target, intelligence shows that ransomware was indeed most successful at penetrating defenses intended to encrypt SaaS data, outperforming attacks on cloud infrastructure, on-premise systems, and indeed endpoints. Drop below the surface, however, and it becomes clear that an increasing majority of these ransomware attacks leverages social engineering techniques such as phishing. The kicker to all of this, well, we won't get into ChatGPT, but with the emergence of AI, it's already clearly advancing in its sophistication. From writing emails that bypass traditional spam filters to ranking malicious content with legitimate SEO techniques, and even tricking at biometric safeguards such as voice authentication, AI is expanding the threat actors toolkit. For organizations, the risk of attack is becoming a case of not if, but indeed when. But with the right insights and layered defense approach, organizations can protect and perhaps even minimize, hopefully minimize, from authentication, encryption, and antivirus to backups and a host of other security fundamentals to help reduce the frequency and severity of attacks. The next 90 minutes in this showcase will explore how organizations with the right processes, the right systems, and indeed the right recovery plans in place can reduce damage and resume business as quickly and securely as possible. So join us as we navigate through a landscape of ever-tightening compliance, ever-tightening regulations, and indeed cyber insurance to unlock a better and more protected future from today's chaotic threat landscape. And to kick things off on that journey, I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker for today, a virtual round of applause for Adam Marget, Product Marketing Manager at Backup and Recovery Platform Experts Spanning. Adam, good morning to you, sir. How are you?
Hey, Nick, good morning, good afternoon. I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well, thank you very much. It is rarely hot over here where I am in the UK, and yet I am sat in a very well air-conned studio, but we don't want to hear all about that. We want to hand over to yourself. So Adam, without further ado, enough of my voice. I'll be back in the next 10, 15 minutes. And indeed, to all of our audience out there, get your questions at the ready. We'll be coming back after Adam's keynote with an audience Q&A. As I said at the start, sling them in the Q&A chat. Myself and Adam over here in studio will get you ready to come up into our Q&A. But for now, Adam, over to yourself, sir.
Excellent. Nick, thank you so much. And folks, I'll bring up some light slideware. It's a pleasure to be a part of this event. So thank you for joining, and a big thanks to the Synergy team here for having me, for this showcase. Whatever Nick said about me, if it was glowing and great, it was all true. If it wasn't, then none of it is true. But regardless, let's dive in and get started here. My name's Adam Margett. It's a pleasure to meet all of you folks. I'm the product marketing manager here at Kaseya for our Spanning backup brand. That is SaaS backup. And I've been with Kaseya in some capacity since 2016. And it's been a real pleasure to be in the product marketing org, because we sit at a really interesting intersection of our customers that are using and consuming our products. They're solving challenges in the real world. And on the other side, I've got our product management and our engineering groups that are driving features and innovations and trying to understand what our customers need and where are they going. So I'm excited to talk about today, data protection, cyber risk, AI, and some of the things that Nick introduced in his keynote to really set the stage for our Q&A and our panel discussion. So we do encourage your participation. Where things started to shift was in this transition. Prior to COVID, when people were talking about hybrid, it was probably more so in relation to the cloud, not work. We were just starting to get a grasp on all of the technologies and the advantages of the cloud, shifting into SaaS application models. And then all of that was accelerated very rapidly, including our workers. So our technology stacks have changed. They've increased in complexity, and so is our workforce. Employees out on the edge are tougher to manage. They're on their own networks. They're outside of the firewall. They don't connect into the VPN as often as they should, or as often as we would like them to. And it makes things like patch management, troubleshooting, even backups, it all becomes more difficult. And as we're managing all of these different platforms, some of the unique challenges of each around backup, security, and recovery become present to the forefront. And according to Upwork, by 2025, there will be an estimated 33 million Americans that are working remotely. And that projection suggests a continuous shift towards these remote work arrangements. And the users are uniquely susceptible in the remote work environment. And this sort of started with the Zoom and the Office 365 bombings. You may have read early stories about colleges when they were performing classes online via Zoom. Somebody would get access to that link and bomb in and play something profane or blast music and interrupt the presentation. But these attacks have really taken on a much more malicious nature. Phishing is one of the leading causes for data breaches and cyber attacks today, responsible for about 26% of all cases, as found by IBM's Security X-Force reports. So when we look at an example here of a credentialed phishing attack, they're going after our users and they want them to take an action. We know this. In a lot of cases, they're trying to elicit an emotional response. It's a late payment. Your shipment has been lost or rerouted. There's urgent action that is needed, but they're becoming more proficient and more authentic in how they are looking. They're dropping in dates. There's personalization in the title. The user's name here has been redacted from this report. And I think that there's even the aspect of, alert fatigue. A lot of us are using these banners. They identify emails from external sources. But as this becomes more commonplace and we're working with external vendors or external suppliers in our organization, and we see these flags, do users start to let their guard down? And does the impact of these banners and some of the tools that we have in place start to wane in their efficacy as they continue to be used without a whole lot of training or reinforcement? So in this case, they're targeting Zoom. They've got a nice branded email here, and they're looking for urgent action. We've got items that require your immediate attention. Please respond. That then redirected the user to a landing page that looked like a legitimate Microsoft login page. Fairly authentic here. We can see as IT professionals, the URL looks a little bit fishy. But they've got links to the privacy statement, the Microsoft copyright down in there, and this is very familiar. And the dominance of the Microsoft here draws the eye to the user. Their account name, redacted here again, is automatically populated, and then the user comes in and submits their password and PII, and now the attacker has gained access to the user's password. The risk here is that, according to Google, 65% of our users reuse the same password for most, if not all, of their websites and their logins. So granting or access to a user's Microsoft 365 password grants way more access than just to their email. It could be the account for Adobe, for your internal CRM system, for other repositories for corporate data, OneDrive and SharePoint sites that can give an actor the ability to gain access and start to move laterally to hunt for that critical data. A lot of these attacks are financially motivated. We'll look at some of the common targets and ultimately what they're after and what the cost is for organizations. But once they're in, they can start to move around. And phishing isn't the only way. It certainly is prominent in today's day and age. There's a lot of credibility that's lended to phishing through the use of AI. But in many ways, we're replaying the greatest hits, and everything old is new again. We know that social engineering is on the rise. The most common way, again, are those stolen credentials to further an attack or to gain initial access. Phishing attacks are often performed at scale. They're looking to catch someone unsuspecting or vulnerable at a specific point in time. But some of these more targeted attacks, spear phishing attacks, where they identify your role, what you're doing, who you're commonly working with, AI is going to improve malicious actors' ability to make these attacks more scalable, compile more research and more data on their targets to drive more relevant results and information to make them more believable. Quid pro quo is an interesting one, and this happened at Tesla a little while back. A Russian nationalist bribed an employee with $500,000 to take a USB drive infected with ransomware and connect it into the company's servers. They later upped that bribe to $1 million. Fortunately, for any of us that enjoy Teslas or their hybrid cars, the Russian was caught. They were fined. They spent 10 months in custody, and then they were then deported. So ultimately, it was a devastating attack that was right on the brink. But if you catch an employee that is disgruntled or at that right time, could that attack have gone through? Phishing is an interesting one, and this is one where AI has really scary implications. Adding in call attempts or voicemails into these phishing attacks in conjunction with emails is lending and increasing the authenticity at a staggering rate, and it's very convincing and difficult for users to spot. PurpleSec security researchers found that combining a phishing attack with a traditional phishing email more than doubled the click-through and the success rates from 37% to 75%. And the last one I think worth calling out here is the idea of tailgating. And, it goes back to that hybrid model. We used to know who we worked with. We'd see the same people in the office every day. But now we've got people coming on board. We may not have seen their face in a couple of years or at all. And, somebody, hey, could you hold that door? They're rushing into a meeting and they're just taking advantage of common human kindness to gain access into the office. But then once they're inside the perimeter, they could drop an infected USB stick into a network attached device. They could connect their own devices to the network, snap photos of passwords that are attached on sticky notes to users' desks, just all sorts of ways that they can abuse that normal behavior. But a lot of these attacks, when we look at where they're targeting in terms of our environments, the largest increase of attacks that we have seen are on endpoints and public cloud infrastructure. Newer technologies or technologies on the edge that may not have the same level of protection or security as they do the on-premise data center. Now, there is some good news. Attackers were least successful in encrypting and damaging public cloud workloads or infrastructure at 42%, but a little bit scary with SaaS data. And when we think about some of the features there that are built to help us, sync and share capabilities, for example, that could proliferate and attack very, very quickly just by the application doing its job and syncing those changes. We had a customer of ours, a Google Workspace customer, that was using sync and share capabilities. And when a user clicked a malicious link, all of those infected files started getting loaded up into the Google Drive. They were able to go back and restore clean versions of those files, but it was a significant effort because it very quickly was replacing thousands of legitimate files with infected files that were no good. And there's also the idea that where we're in SaaS applications and we're in public cloud infrastructure, there was a little bit of a lag in the industry with regards to the shared responsibility model and really understanding what's our responsibility and what are the providers doing for us in terms of data protection and what are the gaps that we need to fill as subscribers. This is starting to come down. That awareness is out there. But especially early on, there were a lot of folks that were under the misconception that just because we've moved that data into the cloud, Microsoft or Google or Amazon or whoever is backing up that data, it's redundant. That's true in some cases, but not the right fit for all different scenarios. So they're attacking on all fronts. And when it comes to recovery in a lot of these areas, we're talking about the flip of a coin. Would you risk your data that's now moved off-prem and into some of these applications? Protection becomes critically important. Recovery from attacks within SaaS applications is hovering right around 50%. Again, that flip of a coin. We are much more mature. We have robust strategies around protecting our data center. Success rates were significantly costly there, but a couple of interesting findings from IBM and their cost of a data breach report. Organizations that are not involving law enforcement with ransomware paid on average almost 10% more, and they suffered a 33-day longer breach cycle. A lot of the forensics and the aid that these law enforcement and other professionals can provide can help identify particular strains of malware, identify remediation or the possibility of decryption keys that are available to shorten that life cycle. But what's also scary is the idea of being able to move laterally and the access that can be gained when we don't have the proper security measures in place. Almost 40% of breaches in cloud environments ended up spanning across multiple clouds. And AI is a big accelerator here. We're not on the brink of an iRobot scenario just yet, I don't think, but there are some serious dangers. Now, there's still some maturing and growth that needs to happen for AI. We asked an image prompt to generate salmon swimming in a river. And we got these, kind of funny, a chuckle at it, salmon fillets that were kind of flopping around in the water here. But this up top images was also AI generated, and it looks pretty convincing. It's pretty real. And this is where it starts to get scary. When these AI prompts are done correctly and validated by a user, they can create really convincing content and imagery. AI generated faces, for example, these are getting pretty good and very convincing with just a little bit of a touch of further editing to remove some of the funny artifacts that may appear in the background or on the periphery of the image, to just hone in on that face to really make it be convincing. And we're also seeing it be used for other malicious examples. I think Nick maybe mentioned in his keynote, or we had talked during preparation, that AI was able to generate legitimate phishing emails by using a prompt that said, hey, develop a phishing email for a training scenario. And that was sufficient to bypass some of the email spam filters. It can also be used to accelerate the nefarious actions of these threat actors. AI is being used as a tool, bypass those spam filters, create malicious code at scale. And, some of the other ways, almost in the SEO use case, it was an interesting case that I came across. It's a double-edged sword. These AI bots are able to use legitimate techniques to rank keywords, headers, etc., to bring malicious content and links up higher in the rankings on Google. So you've got companies that are engaging in these practices, trying to climb the rankings, get their products in front of more of their consumers. Meanwhile, users that are looking for this sort of information, relevant information to solve a challenge or learn more about a product or a topic, they're finding and coming across links that are full of malware and other terrible things. And you might think, I'm smarter than that. I trust my eyes. But, how far can you trust them? And here's just one example. A lot of folks wouldn't take a story on social media seriously if they only saw, one post. But if you hadn't seen this one, a couple of months ago, there was a fear that picked up very quickly and went viral around a potential attack on the Pentagon here in the United States. Now, none of this actually happened. But if you were following Bloomberg, searching up for news or economies, this probably came up in your feed. The image was entirely AI generated. The account was malicious, but you can authenticate that blue check mark with just a few dollars now on Twitter or X or whatever he's calling it. And there was a real-time effect. Gold, bonds, and other assets that people commonly buy up during sort of doomsday times or scenarios, those spiked up early. And these AI-generated accounts, images, and text built a giant misinformation network that ultimately went viral. And you can see some of the following, the shares here, very quick to be picked up. The Arlington Fire Department responded, and they had to go back and combat all of the disinformation to say that, no, there is not a risk here. This is not a legitimate threat. But the impact was very sudden and very real. Now, if you're thinking, I trust my eyes, I'm not going to fall for this sort of stuff. We know the best practices. Can you trust your ears as well? There was a really interesting case that we came across on the New York Times, and one of their articles used ChatGPT to clone herself with AI and to see how far could the AI take things. She conducted a full interview with an AI version of herself with the CEO of Snap. It was a full success. It couldn't quite create a likeness of her on TikTok. It failed to generate that shorter form, punchier content that looked legitimate. But it was able to bypass the banking voice her banking voice biometrics. And this goes back to that phishing use case. If you've got an employee in finance that gets a call from what sounds like the CEO, I'll use an example here of our leader, Fred Vicola is the CEO of our parent company, Kaseya. Fred calls up someone in finance to say, I'm about to get on a plane. You're going to get a purchase order or a requisition, $25,000. I need you to authorize this immediately and wire the transfer. So now you've gotten the call from the supposed CEO. They then follow up with a credible email that's bypassed spam filters. The untrained user or the unsuspecting user, there's a lot of credibility. The researchers at PurpleSec suggest that 75% of the time they're going to authorize that transaction, and that attack will be a success. So some of these safeguards are really important, but the AI couldn't sit in for a full meeting and conduct conversation. A lot of the personal conversations, the chatbots are getting more sophisticated and advanced, but in this use case, they weren't quite there. So ultimately, they've got crafty ways to get in and go after our data. What are they going for? IBM reported that most commonly they're after customer identifiable information, compromised in 52% of all cases. And it was the most expensive record for an organization to deal with at $183 on average cost per record. They were also going after employee information, intellectual property, and other sorts of corporate data. 71% of these breaches are financially motivated. They could be holding that data for ransom. They could look to extort that data. They could steal credentials to move laterally and find other sources or sell those credentials or those identities on the dark web where it's fairly cheap to resell them. What's scary here is that the largest percentage of breaches were caught by non-malicious third parties or outsiders in 40% of cases. About a third of them were identified by internal tools. 27% of breaches were identified by the attacker disclosing, such as that ransom screen that may pop up and says, you've been encrypted, we have your files, you can't get the key, you need to pay us X number of Bitcoins. And those scenarios, in a lot of cases, because the extortion will happen before the ransom note is demanded, those attacks, due to the level of access granted, the data that's already been compromised, when the hacker has done enough to announce, yes, hey, we're holding you for ransom, they're typically at the end of what they're trying to do. They've already extracted that data. They will come back a lot of times and hit with that double extortion, and that raised the overall cost of remediating that breach by almost 20%. Now, some examples of these different attacks we've seen out there in the wild a few years ago. Codespaces was a fan favorite site. A disgruntled employee had access to unsecure, unencrypted containers and their backups. They blew them all away after they had been terminated in what they thought was a wrongful termination. Rockstar was victim of an exfiltration attack, which we've seen an uptick in these. Their source code was leaked online and held for ransom. In Uber, it was a teenager. They were spamming users with authentication requests for hours. Eventually, they gained access via those 2FA requests. They make their ways into unencrypted keys in cloud buckets, and they held those buckets hostage for ransom. In Medibank and in the Grubman Shire attacks, they gained access to sensitive data around medical records, around high-profile individuals, Lady Gaga, Bruce Springsteen, and others. And that data was, in some cases, used to target users in harassment campaigns in the case of Medibank. And in Grubman, it was held for ransom. Ultimately, if you don't want the 200 gigs on Lady Gaga's contracts and PII that we have, you'll pay us a ransom there. But some of these attacks, and we think about the ransomware and the exfiltration, some of these people just want to watch the world burn. There was a couple of months ago, nation-state-sponsored government hacks that were attacking Azure environments, and they used our emphasis on ransomware to really disguise and obfuscate their true intentions. So when the attack was going on, the victims thought, okay, we'll wait for the encryption to settle down. We'll find a way to get the keys or figure out what we can do. But ultimately, they found that after internet-facing devices and AD configurations were compromised, they were not holding the data for ransom and encrypting it, they were actually destroying it entirely. The virtual machines, the storage containers, the VPNs, the cloud network, it was all being blown away. But a lot of this was conducted via malicious admin accounts, and they were hiding a lot of that activity with installation of legitimate tools and other development programs. And this is where, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, during the Q&A in our panel discussion, where AI can help us and sift through some of that noise and identify activity that could be malicious. So there is an opportunity, and we'll talk about this for us to turn AI and use it as a tool to defend our organizations and ourselves. Another case, and where they're starting to get more crafty in how they're targeting organizations, we've talked about, a lot of these attacks are phishing. They compromise a user and endpoint, but they don't always have to. In this attack, ransomware actors were able to impact a vulnerable system through the APIs and administrative accounts that were not protected with MFA. Now, MFA today, in a lot of cases, is table stakes. There's no reason not to enable it. It's free with a lot of the platforms and technologies that we use. But they compromised the global SaaS admin accounts. They installed an Omega user with escalated permissions and credentials, admin capabilities, and they removed almost immediately more than 200 legitimate admins to prevent a response. Again, activity that hopefully with AI on our side, we can spot in real time and respond much more quickly than what ended up happening here. Data ends up being exfiltrated, extortion payment was demanded to prevent the leakage, and there was a denial of server at the level of Microsoft that took down a number of services. There was significant downtime and disruption. When we think about defending our users, our data, and our organization, I came across some interesting research from Google that I think, it's really important to understand our users. Now, this data was dated a couple of years ago. So these folks right now are in that prime age to be either, just about finishing up with school. There are some of them that are, going into college or university, but a lot of them are entering the workforce. These users, younger users, they're familiar with 2FA. They've done it on their social media accounts, on their Facebook, their Instagram. They keep their applications up to date, but they're not as likely to change their passwords. They're not as aware of phishing. An older demographic may be more likely to update their security password, rotate and use different passwords, but they may not be linking information to their accounts. They may not be using password managers. In some cases, their cyber knowledge or their cyber awareness might be lower. You may run into, issues with them spotting legitimate items. So it's important here to layer our defense. Originally, a concept that came from the medical industry. If an attack gets through one layer, one surface, it should be stopped by another. If an attack gets through the spam filter, hopefully it gets stopped by the user or by some sort of phishing defense tool. And threats can originate in between these layers. So it's important to review our strategy and understand where the threats are coming in and how we can build out and ensure that we're closing out those gaps. A very popular technology now is protecting the endpoint itself, EDR. So we've trained and educated our users as one layer. We have spam filters and email gateways as a second layer, but should that get through those other defenses and the user clicks on that link, the ability to isolate that device to prevent the spread of damage very quickly and in real time is a popular technique and a very popular technology that's starting to catch on. So it's constantly, it's important to reevaluate that strategy. We're returning to the workplace. We talked a little bit about the idea of the tailgating users coming back in. We had an engineer here, he'll remain unnamed, in one of our branch offices. And said, well, they had a server that was in an unlocked closet. No one can physically access the machine, but the name is root and the password is admin1. Probably not the best, password hygiene there. Physical security absolutely is important. And ultimately, there is a data loss. Things get through, get clicked, something happens. The important aspect here is thoroughly tested backup and recovery and an incident response plan. IBM found that organizations with high levels of incident response planning and testing, there was a regular cadence to validate the plans, to update the plans, saved on average, or had a breach cost on average $1.49 million less than the average cost of a breach was around $4.35 million. And a lot of the key factors that influenced or had an impact on reducing the cost of a breach were things like employee training, incident response planning and testing, AI and machine learning and driven insights, and a more mature dev and security ops approach to their infrastructure. On the other hand, areas that were increasing the cost of a breach were organizations that fell out of compliance with regulatory bodies. That's a fairly common one. That is self-explanatory. But a remote workforce, increasing those risks of more vulnerable networks and devices. Security skills shortages. We're struggling for a lot of folks. They're struggling to hire and find quality talent and retain that talent. Cloud migration had an impact, and IoT and OT environments that were impacted also raised the average cost of a breach. I think there were some attendees here that had submitted on the pre-survey. They wanted to talk about OT, so I'm really excited to hear from some of the other folks in the industry, how they're handling that aspect of their environment. I think that'll be a great topic for our panel in just a little bit. But ultimately, the response and being able to recover is critically important. An example from one of our customers, someone clicked a malicious link in an email. Google Drive did its job right away and started uploading those malware-infected files. That's where that sync and share falls short of something like asynchronous backup and recovery, where the backups are stored in a different location or in a completely separate repository, separate from the production environment and the production credentials. And that's something that we can help with here. Just an example of Spanning and Kaseya. When we think about the defenses and the layers of defense for our users, defending against phishing with intelligence, training, and specific tools to identify malicious attempts and emails, monitoring for credentials on the dark web, ensuring that we've got good password rotation and password hygiene, two-factor authentication on everything, endpoint detection and response, and ultimately, as we specialize in here at Spanning, backup and recovery of your data, kind of that last line of defense in a lot of situations. Now, I don't want to go too deep into our products and what we do. We want to keep this kind of a thought leadership-oriented session, but if you're interested in learning more, you can certainly get in touch with us there. I'll turn things back over to Nick. I think we're going to move into our Q&A and then into our panel discussion.
Adam, fantastic stuff. Thank you so much. So many examples in there. Can spend the entire day just going on about that. And actually, I have to hold my hands up. I'm certainly one of Google's 65% of users who use the same passwords. And I'm going to go even further. It's not even for some, it is for all. So lesson learned there. I certainly need to change that as well. But thank you very much for that. Some fantastic examples there. Before we get stuck in, to our audience as well, we do have our Q&A now with Adam. I've got a few questions to ask him as well. But if you head down to the bottom navigation into the Q&A section, feel free to fire away those questions. We'll bring you up to ask your question with Adam. Adam, first question from me, and I suppose a really obvious one here, but from where you're sat over at Spanning Sides, what do you see as some of the lower hanging fruit out in the real world? What are some of the things that, those lower hanging fruits that those threat actors are taking advantage of really quickly? And perhaps that's starting to accelerate further than perhaps we've seen, over the last 24, 36 months before the very rapid emergence of AI in the public and consumer spaces.
I think it's fair to say there was a lot of emphasis on the users, and I still think that in a lot of cases those human employees are the weakest part in any sort of firewall or organizational defense strategy. And there are challenges now, especially with those users being in remote locations. They're not next to their colleagues. They get a suspicious email. Maybe if we were all in the office, we'd turn to a colleague and say, hey, did you get this email about, so-and-so, they're requesting a payment, or, this doesn't look quite right. They're saying I've got a voicemail, but I don't have a missed call. This looks a little suspicious. But these different locations, employees that are out on the edge, they're very distracted. Those are still common targets for sure. We're coming up on Labor Day here in the United States, and it's important, that holiday season when workers are taking off time, defenses might be a little bit lax. We're looking forward to long weekends. Holidays, vacations, those are time where a lot of those attacks uptick, and they're still preying on that emotional component. So, one of the gaps, and security awareness training doesn't have to be, hey, we've spent, tens of thousands of dollars with X vendor for for training. There are things that we can do internally to educate our users that don't require a platform. There certainly are platforms that are out there to help them. But I think that when we look at, preparing our users to defend against these attacks, phishing is almost its own area. Conduct a needs assessment, understand where your organization is at today, and identify some of those specific areas that need improvement. I'll share an example for you. I have a colleague, one of our product managers on the Spanning side here is a Microsoft MVP, and he was going down to one of our customers in Texas to help them consult on a migration project. And when he went on site, he's riding up in the elevator to visit our customer, and he saw flyers posted in the elevator for security awareness training. We weren't involved in that, but he was curious. He chatted with his colleague. He said, I'd love to know, how this worked. And this was a company that drills for oil in Texas. So they've got administrative users. They've got users out in the field that are on, smaller mobile devices for the site surveys and collecting information and data out there. So they roll out the training and then they roll out the simulated attacks. And what they found was that there was not a single frontline worker out in the field that fell for a phishing attack. All of the people that were falling for these attacks were the administrative assistants and administrative personnel. They're used to responding very quickly. They process a lot of requests and a tremendous volume of information. And the ability to spot and identify and just question what you're seeing and really double checking, is important. And I think when we talk about knowing our users, the generation of users that are coming into the workforce today, I've been with Spanning for 7 years and kind of in the field and in the IT, around the IT industry for 10. So that puts me firmly in the millennial group. There's a little bit of, boomer in me, but that's neither here nor there. The generation coming in is very, instant gratification. They're responding quickly. They get notifications. They want to reply back. We see that internally here. We've got groups that are struggling a little bit because users get distracted. They get a request. They want to please everyone. So, I worry that, we want to make sure that we've got training for our users, where they're coming from in terms of their backgrounds, what are their expectations, what are their behaviors, and continue to follow up, measure the effectiveness of your training, continue to test these users and follow up, offer additional training for those that may need guidance or for those that may be falling for some of those attacks. But I think that, the users are probably one of the best investments that we can make to help keep our organizations safe. I know that was kind of a long-winded answer. We could talk a little bit about, the culture of an organization, one that is of acceptance and celebration of people that recognize these attacks, not that blame culture where users, they do something wrong. They're worried about the implications. Am I going to get fired? They're scared to report it. And then, it takes way longer for that incident to be discovered. There's an average of 277 days from compromise to discovery of a data breach. So it's important that our users, even if they make a mistake, they're not fearing that the guillotine is hanging over their neck if they've clicked on something. We want them to report it so that we can resolve and start to investigate that issue as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think that piece around comfort, perhaps there's a lot of risk in that comfort. To give you an example of the Texas company and the in-field operators versus the admin staff there. I'm not going to go too far into the AI side of things because I'm keen to raise that with our panel, and there's plenty to raise around the AI piece. But seeing as you're mentioning length of days, that 277, another bit that stuck out to me from your keynote actually was, and surprisingly so, maybe just for myself, maybe for more of our audience members as well, organizations not involving law enforcement paid 9.6% more and took 33 days. So that's a whole month longer in that breach lifecycle. Perhaps an obvious question from my perspective, Adam, but I would have thought that would have perhaps in some ways reduced, not increased, keeping things internally, making those decisions quickly, but actually it seems like an obvious inversion of my assumption there. Could you expand on that a little bit for me, please?
I think that the opportunity there is to share information and to benefit from the collective learnings of our industry at large, whether that's the security professionals at the FBI and at that level, or even other security researchers that are in the field. There are folks like ThreatLocker, SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, IBM, Verizon that are dealing with all sorts of these attacks that may have more history on what a particular malware strain is. Was this an evolution of a particular strain? Are there decryption keys available? The ability to leverage that information for your organization to respond is very important. And I know that to pay or to not pay a ransom is a complex question. It's an ethical question. It's one that I don't have an answer for, though the FBI and law enforcement, a lot of industry professionals will say you should never pay that ransom. It funds further activity. It encourages and emboldens cyber criminals to continue to perpetrate. I realize that that's not always a realistic outcome for every organization and in every situation. But there's an interesting aspect to that I think kind of lends into the AI. And I won't go too deep here, Nick. I know you want to save some of this for our panel, but I think that one of the advantages that malicious actors have in the AI race today is the information that's available at scale publicly for their use case, for those more nefarious use cases. A lot of that is out there. We've published all sorts of blogs, materials, documentation around how to develop and build these programs, how to spot uncredible links, grammatical mistakes, spelling mistakes, odd links, On the flip side, AI needs to ingest a lot of data at scale to learn and to continue to improve. So where we have the ability to share that data, whether it is for the use of, kind of the AI, an AI application, or even just kind of that idea of sharing that knowledge amongst professionals and others that have gone through that experience. I think that comes back to where, we want to involve law enforcement and some of the other professionals in the industry. They may have seen or come across something like this before and have knowledge that is available from their experience in the field compared to what may exist internally at an organization.
Makes complete sense. Thanks, Adam. Last question from me, and then we'll move us onto our panel. And again, out to our audience, any questions anybody has, not just for Adam here. Adam's also going to be joining us on the panel, but indeed for our wider panel session, we'll be doing another audience Q&A. So hopefully we do have some questions from you all coming up for the panel. As I said, down in the bottom navigation, you've got your Q&A. Give that a click. Get questions, they'll come over to myself, Adam on screen with me, as well as Adam, my technical operator, and we will get you up on screen at the right time. We talk about sophistication, and you've seen in the countless examples that you've just given in your keynote there, Adam, outside in the marketplace as well for IT and security professionals, there's that ongoing wave of new tools, new technologies to combat new attacks, new sophistications, new advancements. It's never ending, right? And I don't think any of us here today are naive to think that it ever could be an end to that, or proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. But what advice can you offer in terms of cutting through some of that noise in the marketplace? For those in our audience today, what should they be looking for when they're exploring the right partners to work with, not just in vendors, but in terms of knowledge sharing with law enforcement, knowledge sharing with vendors, knowledge sharing with other parties? What advice can you offer them to help cut through that noise and help more sustainable relationships form?
Well, ultimately, I think that you want to align your strategy with a vendor to one that is, aligned with the needs of your business and with your market. And I'll give you an example from us here at Kaseya. We work with a lot of organizations, and Kaseya primarily plays in the managed service provider space, so the MSP space. These are folks that use a tremendous amount of tools to go through their day and serve their professional clients. Now, there are, internal IT customers that we work with. Unitrends and Spanning historically have been more in that B2B motion. But, just with the Kaseya example, for a technician to go through and perform all of the different routines, they've got on average 17 different software tools that they are going through. There's a lot of flipping between screens, entering in information, discombobulation between these disparate tools. So a lot of our strategy is to commercially integrate these solutions to streamline their day. It overcomes some of the challenges around hiring, around inefficiency of the current technicians that they have in the field. So if your organization, for example, is struggling to keep security analyst staff, we know that it's hard out there to hire. maybe it's a company or a solution that's starting to leverage AI or automation to orchestrate some of those security events and analysis by, predefined or custom playbooks, for example, that solve some of the repetitive tasks that enable you to respond to threats quickly. There's a lot of analysis that has to go on as related to some of these security events, but with AI's ability to ingest, scan, and identify, from within vast amounts of data, unusual patterns, predictive analytics, some of those things can help us overcome those shortages. So I think that you want to, certainly validate, whether it be through third parties, discuss with other users that are using these technologies and tools. But when we think about, the challenges that we're trying to solve, do we need more time back in our day? Do we need to cut through the noise, not just from the industry, but even internally? We've got so many alerts and things that are going along. What are the solutions that are going to help us get there, and how can we implement and leverage them to improve or solve some of the challenges that we're facing in our organization?
Adam, thank you so much. One, for the keynote, two, for sticking around to answer some questions with me as well. And we're going to be bringing you straight back in just a couple of minutes for our panel. So I will see you in those couple of minutes. But for right now, I will wave you off for a quick second, Adam. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you.
A last one from me before we join our panel and start introducing. Again, one last time, we're going to be having our audience Q&A after the panel. So please do get those questions at the ready. As I said, it's down in the bottom navigation. It's the Q&A button. Give it a quick click, questions in, straight through to us, and we will do the rest. So ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from our keynote with Adam. I'd now like to introduce our panel for the discussion today. Locking an open door, protecting against future threats. We'll take a deeper dive into the perspectives of three security leaders, exploring their expertise and getting real on the risks of tomorrow's threats today. And what a panel we have joining us. As you can see on our screen, we have Daryl Rayner, Director of Cybersecurity, Risk and Business Integration over at Texas-based and Texas-focused Energy, Water and Community Service Provider, LCRA. We also have Ida Dabrowski, who's the CISO at Global Full Service Clinical Research Organization, MES. And joining us, we have Dwight Kramer, CISO for the bold hearts and brilliant minds of the University of California, Riverside. And rejoining us, you already know him as Adam Marget. He's a product marketing manager at Spanning, because that's exactly who we've just spoken to. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Adam and our panel today. Gentlemen, good morning. How are we all? Can you all hear me loud and clear? First and foremost, Daryl, a hands up from yourself. Yep. Ido, indeed, as well. I think we have Dwight, who will be joining us in just a few minutes. Adam, I know you can hear me because we've already just been speaking. Thank you for joining us today, chaps. This really, as I say, is a deeper dive into the hive mind of your experience, your insights, and take on how IT and security professionals can better protect, as Adam's already said, colleagues, information, data, and indeed the wider organization. So let's get straight into it. Ida, I'm going to come down to you first. As you sit here today, what's the biggest challenge you're facing when it comes to security, securing against those cyber threats, certainly in this AI accelerated world? What's front of mind for you as we talk on this panel today?
So the biggest issue that I'm dealing with, and this is I'm sure everybody else is dealing with, is that the AI has made phishing and spam, phishing, particularly spear phishing, a much more potent threat than it has been before. Phishing to me has been, it's sort of that gateway drug that gets people in and allows the attacker to gain access to your network. And you've always relied on, and the heuristics of the systems like Barracuda and Cloudflare, all those are based on that these guys have, to be brutally honest, poor language skills, and now they can really tune and use the AI to come up with much more realistic sounding and realistic phishing emails, so that they're harder for us to defend against. They are then they'll sneak their way into our environment. People will not recognize them properly. And even though you've trained people, I just went through a phishing campaign and I was really happy with it because only like 7 out of 1,500 people had actually clicked on the link. And I was thinking, wow, this is amazing. It was like that, we in the past, we've had much higher numbers. We've actually been pushing people to be able to recognize and understand, the risks that phishing presents. And we finally got to that point, and now it's like AI is turning it around and saying, "Oh, sorry, games, the ground underneath you is shifting, and it's going to change even further, and it's going to be harder for you to defend against." That's one of the things that, and the other one is that AI is also lowering the bar for some of these lower level actors to devise their exploits. In my day, you had to know how to code. You really had to know how to code in order to create an exploit that was worthwhile. AI is going to take that away. It's going to eliminate that. It's going to remove that barrier and make it easier. So you're going to have these proliferation of kiddies who, have no clue how this stuff works, but the AI knows how to write it, and it's going to give them and make it easier for them to pick off maybe even small stuff, but nevertheless, small stuff eventually leads to big stuff. So
I was just about to say, it's those small things, as you say, is the gateway into the larger. All you need is that small crack to gain access, and you're away at the proverbial races there. Daryl, up to yourself, sir. Same question. Feel free to open up on what you just heard from Mido, or indeed from Adam previously as well.
Right. Well, the old story about going camping and there's a bear, and you don't have to run faster than the bear. You just have to run faster than your other camper, right? Well, in cyber now, there can be 1 billion bears. There can be a bear attacking every single website every single day, when it used to had to be orchestrated and coordinated with one to many people to get this thing done. Now AI can spawn agents and just cruise the internet and hit every single website, testing for something very simple like an open port. And we no longer just have to be better than the next guy. We have to be better than the AI.
Wow, it's a perfect soundbite. Yeah, better than the AI and not the slowest one when the group of bears is chasing. Adam, up to yourself as well. So what would you add into what Daryl and Ido have already said here, and what's front of mind most for you today?
I think that they've captured it really well and echoed a little bit of what we've talked on the on the keynote, the evolution of the sophistication of attacks, the lending in and phishing. I think that there are two sides of security: the preventative side and the reactive side. And I think that the preventative side has gained a lot more mind share recently, and it's certainly one where we've got much more heightened focus, understanding the potential of what AI has and what it can do for us. So I think that I'm hopeful that we'll be able to leverage that to better predict future attacks. I think that Daryl made a great point that we don't know where they're coming from and where they're aiming to hit us. It could be, our traditional data center infrastructure. It's our endpoints. It's our SaaS applications. It could be our IoT or our OT devices. We need to be prepared to defend on all fronts. And I think that, Nick, this goes back to some of the challenges that we talked about during the first portion of the Q&A, where there's just such a significant attack surface and there's so much volume. It's very difficult for a lot of these teams that are struggling with manpower or even hours. Nobody can give us more hours in the day. That really presents a challenge for us.
Thank you, Adam. And indeed, thank you, Darren and Ido. And to come on to our next question, actually, which is not too dissimilar to Ido, something that you'd mentioned. This is a quick snippet I've got from The Guardian, actually, who reported US-Israeli cybersecurity firm had used the latest iteration of ChatGPT. Here we go. And there was only time before I or someone would bring up ChatGPT in the AI conversation. Latest iteration of ChatGPT to produce a credible seeming phishing email. It circumvented the chatbot safety procedures by telling the tool that it needed a template of a phishing email for an employee awareness program. So even within that context, we're starting to see, to your point, Ido, those small little cracks. You don't need to know coding. You don't need to. In fact, probably now you just need to know how to give a relatively mediocre prompt and circumvent, just as this cybersecurity firm did. What's the trade-off for that? I mean, what is the, that's becoming easier. Are there ways for organizations to leverage that simplicity to their own advantage? What's the counter-attack in inverted commas here?
So So ChatGPT in itself is, to me, is a very intelligent regurgitator is what it really comes down to. You know, from our perspective, we made a strategic decision to block access to ChatGPT so that, you know, people within the organization couldn't use it. You know, the real trade-off here is, you know, in terms of not blocking, let's say, access to some sort of large learning language model like ChatGPT, is that, you know, you're forcing your own people to be more creative. You're requiring them to, you know, to really focus on their own work. That it's, you know, it's sort of that itch that won't go away unless you scratch it. And, you know, the desire to use it to say, oh, well, I can't quite get this. Maybe I'll put it in to ChatGPT. From our perspective, it's a very big risk because we have proprietary source code to our in our environment. And I put that into ChatGPT. ChatGPT ingests it, and then it'll say somebody else by chance from a competitor says, hey, I got the same similar problem. ChatGPT gives them the same answer, or gives them an answer to, or solution to that really belongs to me, you know, that should belong to me. All right. So the trade-off is that you lose a little bit of efficiency. You know, you make it a little harder on your own people by saying, no, we can't use these kind of things. You know, I can't protect against the bad guys using it. They're going to use it no matter what. Okay. And I don't care how much OpenAI says that, oh, we have controls and we have this, and we're tightening our controls. You know, people get to figure out how to get around those controls, right? But from my perspective, biggest issue is that intellectual property will go out and will become picked up by a competitor, and it will be leveraged against and be used in a competitive environment situation against me. And I will end up, you know, losing a contract or losing an opportunity because they're basically using the solution that really belongs to my team for that. You know, we don't even allow our IT and our security operations folks to use ChatGPT. It's just we just do not feel comfortable and figure that it's worth the trade-off of requiring them to make a little bit more effort than to just simply say, well, I can just go to ChatGPT. Because to be honest with you, throwing it to ChatGPT is like saying, oh, I'd like to know the answers to the test. Theoretically, I mean, this was a kind of an oversimplification. I'd like to know the answers to the test, or at least I'd like to know the questions to the test before the test actually shows up, and then you have the advantage. Okay, so that's kind of where I see it. It's a bit of an efficiency trade-off, but nevertheless, it's required.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Ido. And it's the itch that won't go away. I love that. I think a really good summary of that there. Daryl, I'm going to come up to you in just a second because I could see you furiously nodding away at numerous points. But Dwight, welcome to the panel, sir. How are you doing? I'm assuming that is the background and you're not actually walking through a luscious campus. Perhaps you are. Can you hear me loud and clear, sir?
Can hear you loud and clear. Thank you. And
fantastic.
Yes, it is the background.
We'll come down to yourself in just a few seconds, Dwight. But Daryl, up to you for the same question. And again, feel free to add on to anything you've heard from Ido already.
Yeah, sure. So good points. We don't allow any proprietary information to be used. And I'll say Chat GPT, but I mean Bard and the other tools, hundreds of them proliferating as we speak. Many of them are front ends to one of the big four, and others are on their own trying to spin up some sort of AI response. Where we see it relevant is like today, I was asked a question by some senior manager about how are we requiring vendors to have a sustainability program. So I was able to go into Bard and Chat GPT and say, please give samples of sustainability clauses to put in vendor contracts. I'm not giving away any proprietary information. I don't care if somebody knows that I'd like to look at a clause, and then I can take that back and give it to our policy specialist or they could do it, and they'll have some input, right? A lot of it's still incorrect and not quite on point. Of course, the AIs can't judge the depth and complexity of a question the way humans can. But we're getting a lot of value out of it that way, and asking things like, what sort of security vulnerabilities are being exploited today? You know, you get all these threat reports from dozens of places. And that's another one, a consolidator of public information. But we don't allow any BCSI information, any PII information, any code whatsoever to be used in that. But until, you know, Microsoft and Google have both announced private, right, where the engine is there and it uses and communicates with public information, but anything you feed it remains 100% private. And I can tell you, we're not going to be first in line for that, but we are waiting for it.
Sounds like you're well prepared, Daryl, and eager to go to that extent as well. But I think, yeah, it's clearly from both yourself and Ida, you know, being extremely aware of and proactive in how those policies, guidelines, rules, everything else under that culture, how they are communicated out into that business to control, and into the organization to control how AI is utilized internally, I think is only going to become increasingly more important as well. Adam, I'm going to come to yourself the same question, and then Dwight, down to yourself as well. But Adam, from the Spanning perspective, and indeed from your own personal perspective, what else would you add on to what Daryl and Ida have already said here?
You know, I think Ida made a great case, you know, and there are two sides of the fence. You've got folks out there like Microsoft, you know, announcing that, you know, we've got a Microsoft 365 AI subscription that we want to deliver for folks. Canva, who deals in graphic design, is working on integrating some features of ChatGPT into the tools for their clients. But on the other side of the fence, you know, Ida was talking about, we don't use this at all in our organization. I know Samsung has a pretty strict policy that restricts usage among their employees internally as well. And I think that Daryl made a great point in that, you know, what we're feeding into the platform or into the AI, you know, what's internal versus external, and there's some risk there. And I think it's fair for an organization, they're not yet, you know, using AI, or it's still a little bit of a gray area, to do a risk assessment and understand, you know, what are the risks for my company? What risks does AI present here? How are they going to manifest? What are the controls that we need to put in place around that? What are the guardrails? And is this sort of thing, you know, clear and communicated to our employees? For us here, I know that we will sometimes use a little bit of there are folks internally here at Kaseya that will use the ChatGPT to help come up with something like a sales script. And that's where, you know, we need to identify where are the groups of employees or the users that are most likely to be exposed to AI. How can they use it productively and safely? And what are the risks that may present themselves, you know, from something like a phishing attack, as we've talked about? You know, sales, the IT department, and other customer facing roles may be higher risk than others in the organization.
Thank you very much, Adam. And just before we come down to Dwight, we've got a couple of audience questions that have already started coming up. So we'll be moving on to our audience Q&A in around about 10 minutes or so. So ladies and gents in our audience, please do keep them coming. We've got a couple ready to come out to Adam, Daryl, Ida, and Dwight in just under 10 minutes time. But Dwight, down to yourself, sir. Obviously, a lot of talk about AI, its increasing sophistication, and its leverage by threat actors, how they're starting to become far more advanced and sophisticated in terms of grammar, sentence structure, using things like phishing attacks, but also understanding how to actually build code through prompts into things like ChatGPT. I suppose that down to yourself, having joined a more broader question back to the first that I asked the rest of the panel. What is front of mind for you in the context of AI and cybersecurity and those threat actors and everything they're up to around the likes of phishing today? What's front of mind for you?
So there's several things to that question. And so what's front of mind is just how it's going to make everyone's jobs easier, including the bad actors. And they're going to end up having to prioritize how they're going to attack, what they're going to attack, and move forward with that. And so it's just going to be a way that anyone that can leverage AI in the appropriate way within their organization, it's just going to make it easier. Bad actors don't have rules like you can't use this because of proprietary information. And so they're going to be able to quickly ramp up and understand how it's used much faster than organizations that have a strict policy of no use at all. Here within the UC, we're all trying to figure out the University of California system. We're all trying to figure out how best to leverage it. We have tons of intellectual property that we want to be very sensitive of going out. But at the same time, professors, students, staff, they're all chomping at the bit to see how to use it within their areas. We've put out some particular guidance. We're looking to streamline that. Within UCR, we're actually looking to sign a contract with Google to have that, what Daryl's talking about, private containers, so that we can really put more in. But we're actually encouraging people to use it for lower risk level data sets so that we can start getting a good understanding of how it's used as we move forward.
As you said, that bad actors don't have rules. One, love that. And two, a perfect segue into my next question, Dwight. So thank you very much there. So actually moving on from, we've spoken a lot around that kind of holy trinity of threats, attacks, security, vulnerabilities. But I'd like to frame this question with another proverbial trinity: compliance, regulations, and indeed liability insurance. While as Dwight already says, bad actors not having rules, it's the Wild West for the world's cyber criminals, out there taking every tool possible to find those new cracks, those new routes in, with lessening potential skill sets and more at their disposal in their toolkit. While it is that Wild West for those bad actors out there, for the likes of our audience, for IT leaders, security leaders, and indeed the organizations they serve, further harnessed by stringent compliance standards, regulatory standards across the board. Ida, I'm going to come down to you again, sir. How do you find that balance between pushing, in inverted commas, the boundaries of your own cybersecurity without falling foul of regulatory and compliance and indeed liability in insurance boundaries?
Well, that's a very good question, actually. Finding that balance, because I know that I'm constantly getting pushed by sales teams, by researchers, by almost everybody in the company saying, we want to use this, we want to have this, we want to connect that. So from my perspective, it's, one of the things that obviously we've been doing is, like anybody else has been doing, you keep a tab of all the risks that you are willing to take on, where you are able to go, how much you're willing to tolerate. One of the things that I did early on is evaluate all the things that we're doing and kind of come up with a risk score of where we are, and then bring that to the executives and say, look, how much risk are you willing to take? How much? And then kind of keeping them informed of this is going to push us further into this zone, and kind of color coding it so that they understand, we're in the yellow zone right now. Okay, green is where I'd like to be, but that's also, where it's most restrictive. Yeah, we're in the yellow zone, and I'm comfortable with that. But the minute you start saying to me, well, we want to push and push and push, we want to we want to give all these capabilities to our staff members, I have to remind them that, first of all, yes, one thing you were pointing out, we are in a regulated environment. We work with, one of the things we work with is FDA. So obviously a lot of that has to come into play. And then also we have, we deal with PHI, and predominantly PHI, very not, and so HIPAA is a big issue, and GDPR, because we're an international company. We have work being done in the EU. And I had to explain to them that, the more you push the envelope, the closer we're getting to this line where we're crossing into red. And then, I've been working on telling them, look, what is your risk appetite? How much are you going to, can you take? All right. And then, and educate them on the idea of risk tolerance. that there is the appetite. The appetite says I can take this much and then I'm going to be completely, over the limit. Tolerance means how close can I come up to that appetite, and I explain to them and I have to bring that to them all the time, because from their perspective, oh, this is a great new technology. Hey, let's just use that, or, oh, this is going to make, save us a little bit of money here. And that's going to help us because X, we're going to have more, revenue after after everything's said and done. But I said to them, every time you push that envelope, you are putting us higher and higher into risk. And what's interesting is I'm backed up by the cybersecurity insurance guys, because they're looking and they say, they look at some of the stuff that we may do, and they're like, we're not comfortable with that. And what I'm expecting is at some point they'll say, you know what, you do that, you're on your own. Don't come to us for insurance, or don't expect us to cover any losses that may occur because you did that. It is a balancing act that you have to finally, kind of walk that tightrope. You've got to walk that tightrope. Because I can't sit there and tell them no, because I become a broken record. B, I become the blockage to their to their ability to do anything serious in terms of business. So we have to have an honest, open risk discussion when we talk about these technologies. But when it came to AI, I simply said it is too new. It's still very much in its infancy. I am just going to have to say no to it. As much as you may have heard about this on some podcast or something like that on your drive into the office, trust me on this. This is what we would call a bad idea, and then leave it at that and try to emphasize that.
Thank you very much, Ido. And I think I'm going to come up to Daryl again, but not just the nodding heads, but the smile on this is a bad idea, which I'm certain everyone on the panel has said more than numerous times throughout their career with good reason. I'm also conscious that we do have a few audience questions that I would like to get to. So, Daryl, I'm going to come up to you as well. Feel free to add anything to what Ido said as well. Also, a note from Luis, one of our audience members here, saying, wondering about the role that risk areas have to play here. How do you see these areas catching up? Are risk officers aware of the speed and relevance of these new threats? So I think anything you want to fold into that piece from Luis as well, Daryl, feel free to do so.
Yeah, I had spent some time early in cyber being the Department of No, not very much fun. And then in a couple of organizations, gotten it to be more partnering as it is in my current organization. And now I find myself again in joining the Department of No, because we just can't allow any of our confidential information. Now, if you want to look at it and say how many people like the color blue, have at it, right, when you're designing a logo. But if you just can't use it now for any sort of proprietary or confidential data. And being in a public critical infrastructure environment now, that's darn near everything having to do with electricity generation, storage, transfer, anything. You just can't, right? Because there have been documented attacks on our grid every day now for the past 3 or 4 years. So you just can't. I don't care what you want, use it to describe improve the schedule for maintenance for your trucks, right? Have at it for that. And then that's a fine line. When does that cross over from a trivial sort of public, the F-150 maintenance cycles are not confidential, into, oh, that truck is going to be out of commission at a certain time and something could happen with it. It just boggles the mind, the interconnections that an AI could make instantaneously. That's all I've got.
All you've got, which is a lot, Daryl. Thank you very much. Adam, I'm going to come up to yourself, and then Dwight down to yourself, and then we're going to take a couple of very quick audience questions. Adam, Office of No. Feel free to expand on Daryl's piece there as well. I'm also keen to get us back into, on the side of the stringent regulatory and compliance boundaries, frameworks you have to work in as well. But for organizations, and a question to you, and Dwight, I want to ask the same question down to yourselves as well to build on what Ido and Daryl have already said. Do you feel that regulatory and compliance bodies are going to have to work closer with organizations to morph and evolve what that landscape needs to be doing in terms of protecting industry, protecting organizations, and working and partnering with organizations moving forward in different ways?
I do, and I'd be interested for Dwight's take on this, but I think that, one of the issues that we have is, who has to disclose what and what's made publicly available. You've got the chatbots from Google, you've got Bard out there, OpenAI, et cetera. I think that it's important that these companies that are using and developing AI are disclosing those efforts and that information, publicly. There's a lot of growth around this area, but we need to, I think, share and collaborate collectively to understand those implications, like Ido and Daryl have hinted at. We've seen, from our side, a lot of tightening on regulations, and sometimes they're more checkbox items. You must have 2FA, you must have immutability for your backups, so on and so forth. But there is the aspect of, well, hey, if the organization is going to go in this direction, we don't totally support that. But I also think that there's an opportunity to leverage AI or AI-assisted tools. Responses to breaches are minimally 12% faster with AI-assisted technology. We talked a little bit about the ability to scan and analyze large volumes of information, but for log analysis and event correlation, analytics on user behavior, security automation and orchestration, I think that there are advantages here as well. I think that the panel is rightfully skeptical and very aware of a lot of the risks that AI presents, but there are aspects of AI or machine learning where we can use this for good. We can use this to streamline some of the processes and the things that we have to do internally to remain in compliance, document that information, and be able to analyze and react to it in an effective and concise manner.
Yeah, rightfully skeptical, I think, is a good way of putting it, and for obvious reasons. So, Dwight, down to yourself as well, sir. Everything and anything you've heard from not just Adam, but Daryl and Ido on that question. What's your take on that regulatory and compliance piece? How could they better partner with organizations moving forward? Think you may be on mute there, Dwight.
Thank you.
No
That
worries.
always happens at least in one meeting. So there's a lot going on in the regulatory environment, and the issue about the regulatory environment is it's slow to adapt to new technology. It takes a long time for the regulatory environment to really catch up. I mean, in different parts in the world, they're looking at banning AI altogether. In other parts of the world, they're saying, okay, well, we'll do something, and it's really nothing. And so there's a real concern about using regulatory to try to help figure out what we're really going to be doing with AI. As it relates to regulatory environments and keeping our data safe internally, I think this is just a new technology that we have to apply the same risk metrics that was talked about earlier. It's really figuring out what is appropriate for this environment. I would say, at least within the UC system, we're taking a little bit more of a lenient approach than others are taking. And I mean, from my perspective, slightly oversimplified, AI is a modern calculator. Most math classes don't say you're no longer allowed to bring in a calculator. Most math classes require you to have a calculator before you step into it. And so I think having a strong no to AI, even now in the early stages, drastically hampers an organization, a company's ability to adapt and move forward in the future. Figuring out guardrails, figuring out good communications, figuring out, hey, if you're going to work on this, drafting a policy using AI for your general environment as a starting point, drafting some basic marketing material for your area using AI that is a starting point, figuring out where is that gray line And as the AIs become where we can start getting private AIs to help us, which is on the horizon, then you can actually start digging into more sensitive and intellectual type property.
Thank you very much, Dwight, and a lot, not just from there, but also Ido, Daryl, Adam, from your responses as well. I think this panel could easily carry on for another 45 minutes, but I'm conscious that we're getting into our last 10 minutes, and we do have a couple of audience questions. So I'm going to see if we can bring up Adam Izzard to join our panel. If you give us just a quick second, Adam, and indeed our panelists will look to add Adam into the panel. Adam, hello there, sir. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Fantastic. Good morning / good afternoon to you, Adam. Over to yourself. What's your question for the panel?
Thank you. I've really enjoyed the discussion so far, and I think certainly the panelists have presented our concerns. We've taken the lenient viewpoint on AI, and that's partly because the major concern is data loss, and the right tool for data loss is DLP, not trying to screw down Gen AI. So there's certain controls you can put in place. Some are more effective than others, as has already been mentioned. Policy and process is one area. The second is most web gateways will allow you to present a warning to the user as well, to remind them to be sensitive about the information. So it'll recognize a Gen AI site and present that for them. Pop-up box, let them carry on with their day. They're more of compliance tick boxes, but then on the second hand, DLP monitoring that egress point. And it is just a standard egress point. You know, it's the same as email, it's the same as posting on a forum. You're putting something out from external from the business. It's data, and it may be IP, it may be sensitive. And I live heavily in the regulated environment myself. I'm in a law firm, UK law firm. We got the Solicitors Regulation Authority crawling all over us, ICO. We have to keep client information confidential at all times, but yet we've still got to progress. And I come from 24 years in the UK military, and we're more adapt, I suppose. We're taught that way, to be more adapt to change and unpredictability. And one of the phrases that we've always had is you've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. You've got to, if you stand back and watch the fight, you're not on the front foot. You're not engaging with the enemy, in this case, Gen AI. So it's more a case of the old days of us standing back and making sure we're satisfied has gone. We've seen the adoption curve for Gen AI. It's almost vertical compared to anything that that's been released recently. And we no longer have that luxury of being able to stand back and wait for the early adopters to do it, especially in a business that generates revenue, where if you don't go to a fight with the right ammunition, the right weapons, you know, you're going into a firefight with a pistol and they've got machine guns. Other law firms are adopting it. It certainly speeds up so many processes. It can draft contracts, it can do this, it can do that. We wouldn't be able to say no to it. If I said no to it, you know, we're just effectively taking ourselves out of the market as an adaptive law firm. We've got to be agile, basically. So that would be my sort of say on things. That totally get the DLP risk, but that's an overall subject of DLP and knowing where your data is, tagging it and controlling it at all times, because it's leaking everywhere anyway. So Gen AI, I don't think presents any more of a risk in that respect. Yes, it's easy to paste in, but it's also easy for my solicitors to paste a huge amount of text into WhatsApp or a million other tooling, Discord boards, which has recently been slammed. So, you know, they're doing it anyway. The option is to obviously mark the data, protect the data, if that's the concern. And there are other concerns, I know, false positives, the hallucinations of Gen AI. There are some concerns, and yeah, there's a lot of people adopting their internal, closed AI models. But again, it will only then be as good as the information it's being trained on. Whereas you've got the internet, which is always going to be a huge source of information. You can restrict it for certain tasks. If you want to know about legal matters, then we could restrict AI to LexisNexis, for example, the legal database of cases.
Yeah.
And there are people doing that. But at the same time, if you want to know about strategy, if you want to know about marketing or anything like that, you're best off scraping that from the World Wide Web.
Yeah. So that idea of, Adam, thank you so much for the question first and foremost, and indeed for all those years of service there, and your point of get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And the adoption of a near vertical line. Daryl, I saw you nodding at that point. I'm going to come up to you, Daryl, and then quickly Iodo down to yourself and Dwight, just for your take on that piece. And again, I'm conscious of time here, so kind of somewhat whipping through. But Daryl, I'd like to come up to yourself, sir. What's your take on Adam's point there? In agreement, slight difference there. Where would you sit?
Right. So I think agreement. The use of AI will be more appropriate for confidential situations when it's internal. And one of the things a couple of panelists have mentioned is that AI can be wrong. Early on, I asked it for the UK folks, the members of the Beatles, and it also gave me Billy Preston, who was like the fifth Beatle, right? Because he was a studio. So even a question about something as popular as they fixed it, right, since then. But it can be wrong in subtle ways, and it can be wrong by omission or commission, right? And I think for now, it's great for like helping word social media messages. They're going out anyway, right? So if you want to draft things that are going to be public, like a press release or public social post or anything like that. Otherwise, I think that we have to work together, and the COO of our firm, I'm leading an AI project right now to draft policy, and everybody's arguing. Some people want to use it, some people want to ban. There's not a consensus among our executives yet.
Thank you, Daryl. So agreeing with that. Iodo, down to yourself, sir. Same part. Agree, disagree, somewhere in the middle. What's your take from Adam's point there?
Look, I mean, everything they're saying is accurate. I mean, and I like what Daryl pointed out. AI can be misleading. I mean, it can be very much misleading. I mean, you've heard the stories of these reporters who have communicated within AI, and had these kind of discussions in which it fabricates things, because it's only as smart as the information, that it's been fed. If you feed it skewed information, it will go in that direction. We're not talking about an AI. We're not talking about the Borg from Star Trek here. We're not talking about an AI that is like Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey that can think to essentially for itself. This is again, as I said at the beginning, it is a very smart regurgitator, is what it is. But the problem is that it's in the way these language models are built, they can skew and weigh different pieces of information based on how it's presented to them, and so you may not get the answer you're expecting, and so you have to be very careful and very circumspect in using it. I think Daryl's right. Those social media messages, it helps to clean them up. Good, go for it, knock yourself out. But if you're looking for something that's really targeted, it is not something you're better off asking a real human, and honestly. So there's caution. I caution, I'm sort of one of those kinds. I'm still sitting on the sideline waiting to see the next generation of these language models, to see how they're improving, to see how they're going to protect itself from misinformation being fed into it, because there are actors out there who are dying to feed bad information to it. I mean, then some of them.
Well, if it's on the internet, it must be true, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, wasn't it Lincoln who said that? Abraham Lincoln. I'm looking forward to the day that it's more reliable, but I am also right now I'm being very cautious, and I would caution, and I basically say it has its place. It may have its place in your environment. In our environment, I'm not there yet, but in other people's environment, they may be more careful. They may be more comfortable with it, and that's fine. Again, as I said, it's all a matter of risk.
Yeah, risk and contextual caution as well, Ido. Thanks very much. Love the Abe Lincoln, definitely directly sourced as that quote as well. Dwight, going to come down to you, sir, for the same question. And Adam, up to yourself. Conscious, we've got a few more questions that we did need to get through that we're not going to have time to get through, unfortunately. But to Mark, to Luis with another question, and to another Adam, a lot of Adams today. We will make sure that we follow up with all of your questions, and indeed from everybody on the showcase today, we'll make sure we share all of those questions and indeed the recordings. But Dwight, down to yourself, where do you sit on that as well? Some really nice insight from Darryl and Ido from Adam's question. What's your take on it?
Well, from Adam's question, one of the things I found interesting is saying that saying no to AI is just not possible, making reference to the adoption curve. I 100% agree with that piece. I have a little more doubt to saying that DLP is the right tool. I managed a DLP program for several years, and DLP is very good at getting structured data. It is not very good at getting intellectual property. It is not very good at figuring out unstructured data sets that are out there. And so using DLP to educate and inform and engage, absolutely. Like having that gateway and say, hey, you're on a site, please be mindful. Developing things of that nature. Maybe for if you have very structured data that you want to keep track of in some way, absolutely. But I think more importantly is developing a culture that says, hey, this is what we can do this with this tool set. Here's where we're looking at. And if you do go beyond that and you're caught, there are consequences for that piece of action. And really making it a part of everyday conversation so that everyone knows what they're doing, how they're doing it, where they can be innovative, where they need to pull back from it and really engage in that way.
Right, thank you. Adam, Mr. Izzard, I'm going to thank you very much for your question as well, sir. Thank you for joining us up on screen today. We're going to wave you off now. And Adam M, Mr. Margate, I'm going to come up to yourself, sir, for again, to close us up on today's panel and today's showcase as our opening keynote and now our final closing panelist. What's your take on not just Adam Izzard's question, but everything you've heard from the last kind of 5 minutes or so on the panel, and what would you like to have as a final closing takeaway out to our audience today?
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. It was a pleasure to be here today and to hear some of the different perspectives. And I feel like on our panel, we had folks that were on kind of all ends of the spectrum. Ido and his organization a little bit more cautious around AI. Darryl sounds like he maybe is in the middle, and Dwight's embraced it a little bit more readily than other organizations. But I think that the things that we've talked about, understanding the role of AI in context of our organization, understanding the risks that are present, the guardrails that we may need to put in place, and then to Dwight's last point, educating the user. We opened up, talking about phishing, and I think it's very much the same thing. We need to educate the user on the tools, the potential risks of those tools, and make sure that they're using it in a way that is safe and productive. Overall, and I think all the panelists have had a little bit of input that, we're not on the brink of an iRobot, as I said earlier, but I'm excited to see, where this goes. We've started to see some pickup in the industry around behavioral-based threat detection, endpoint security, and even, the potential for AI to build and understand behavioral models and patterns to identify 0 days, a huge risk, a tremendous risk, but I think that in all of it, we need to be, we need to stay safe out there. We need to educate our users, continually stay in front of them, some of the tools and techniques that we've talked about. But I'm interested to see where this goes and how we can start to turn, AI or continue to build AI as a tool, for good. Certainly the information that our adversaries have is bountiful. They're using it effectively. I'm excited to see the counterpunch and what some in the industry, whether it's, Microsoft, Palo Alto, and others, continue to develop down the road, and, organizations outside of just those major ones as well. It'll be exciting to see.
Fantastic, Adam. Thank you very much. And indeed, Daryl, Dwight, and Ido, who I unfortunately just dropped off, but to all of our panelists, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us today. Much appreciated. And Daryl, I will make sure that I am faster than the slowest person being chased by that proverbial bear. Really appreciate the time. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And indeed, to all of our audience, we are at time. In fact, slightly over. So thank you very much for sticking with us for those extra few minutes. As I said at the start of our showcase today, the team here at Synergy will be in touch with you all in the coming days to get feedback, provide any further information you would like. Indeed, the likes of Mark, Luis, and Adam from our audience questions, we will make sure we follow up with you there and to connect you with any additional and ongoing conversations you would like to have. But for myself, from Adam, and from our studio team here, for now, have a great rest of your day. Take care. Goodbye.